few months ago, I stumbled on a piece of artwork that I once received as a gift, a small print depicting a neighborhood in Jerusalem, close to where I had once lived and studied. The print had been sitting in a box for years. It wasn't exactly my style. I sort of thought of it as a little bit too touristy to frame and hang on the wall. Hanging Jewish art in our home is important to Larry and me. So as we have chosen art, we have often looked for pieces by Jewish artists and Israeli artists. But other than a few pieces, most of our Israeli art is not obviously Israeli. They are images of birds, flowers, a still life with fruit. But when I stumbled upon this print of Jerusalem, in the midst of this terrible year, I suddenly felt compelled to have it out on display, not hidden away in a box. So I put the print on a bookshelf in my living room, next to a piece of fabric art that I once purchased from a Jewish Israeli artist, depicting a Jerusalem window that reminded me of walking through my old neighborhood there. Two small connections to Israel, there on my bookshelf, a symbol that my heart is in the east, Libi b'Mizrach. As I was arranging them on the shelf, it occurred to me that we owned another piece of Jerusalem-themed art. It was in a box of Larry's old things from college and his young adulthood. The kind of box that you don't want to throw out, but you don't know what else to do with it. So it sits in the basement. It was a ceramic relief sculpture of Jerusalem. And like my print, it had struck me as a little bit touristy. I figured Larry had probably purchased it when he went to Israel in high school. But now, with everything going on, I wanted it on my bookshelf. I found the box and the sculpture in it, and it was just as I remembered it. More souvenir than fine art. The word Jerusalem was carved in English. I brought it upstairs and put it on the bookshelf next to the two other pieces of Jerusalem art. But when I turned it over, I was surprised to see a label glued to the back. With compliments, it said, and gave the name of a lawyer and his firm. Handwritten below that, in Larry's handwriting, was the phone number and address for the law firm in Gaza City. When I asked Larry about it, he told me that the relief sculpture had been a gift from a time that he had volunteered at a conference during law school. One of the presenters, a Palestinian lawyer who had been part of the peace negotiation team, had given the sculptures out as a thank you to the volunteers. It was 1998, a few months before President Clinton engineered an agreement between Bibi Netanyahu and Yasser Arafat that was intended to reinvigorate the peace process. Peace was elusive in 1998, but there was some reason for optimism. And now, years after that very different moment in history, and miles away from Gaza City, here it sat on my bookshelf. I don't know enough about the lawyer to know the full significance of what it means to keep the sculpture in my home, next to works of Jewish Israeli artists depicting the same city that they love. Sometimes I walk past the sculpture and feel unsure about it. But every time I look at the bookshelf, I think about three things: my love for Israel, my rejection of the false binary of Israeli versus Palestinian, and my insistence on finding hope. Walking past the shelf reminds me first and foremost of my love for Israel and how important it is to keep that love out in the open, not hidden away in a box. In a year when Israel has been in anguish, I want to hold it close. In a year when people have questioned the authenticity of the Jewish historic connection to the land of Israel, I wanted the art in my house to affirm that this land of my ancestors, so central to Jewish texts, rituals, and life, is part of what home means to me. One of our blessings at Beth David is that we are a diverse community, and that includes our relationships with Israel. Today, I want to tell you more about what Israel means to me. I do not expect that everyone in this room will agree with everything that I have to say. I've scheduled several opportunities for us to talk and learn together about Israel in the upcoming months. All points of view are welcome, and I hope that you will consider joining some of these conversations. It's so important that we be able to talk about these vital issues together, even, maybe especially, when we disagree. For me, being a Zionist means that as a Jew, I am connected to the land of Israel, its nature, its culture, its language, and its people. It means understanding that our life as Jews, even here in the diaspora, would be both less safe and less culturally and spiritually vibrant without Israel. It means taking responsibility to criticize Israel when necessary, out of love and out of a sense of how vital it is, calling Israel to meet our highest aspirations for the values that a Jewish state can embody. Being a Zionist means acknowledging that my identity as a Jew is not simply a personal identity or faith, but it is also part of a collective, the Jewish people. It means affirming that the state of Israel has a right to exist because all peoples, including the Jewish people, have a right to self-determination. Our Torah reading this morning begins with an affirmation of our collective identity as a Jewish community. Each of us has a relationship with God as an individual, and each of us has a relationship with God as part of humanity. But the Torah also teaches that we stand with God, before God, as part of a Jewish people. Atem nitzavim hayom kulchem lifnei Adonai, we read this morning. You stand this day, all of you, in the presence of Adonai, your God. And the Torah reading ends with an affirmation that a people needs a land. Ha'adama asher nishba Adonai la'avotecha, la'Avraham, li'Yitzchak, u'li'Yaakov, latet lahem. This land that Adonai swore to your ancestors, to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob. But here is the second thing I remember when I walk past my bookshelf. That as much as we love the land, we are not the only people to call it home. Looking at Jewish and Palestinian art of Jerusalem side by side challenges me to remember how intertwined our stories are. This year has been so traumatizing for many of us as Jews that it can be hard to have room for any other story besides our own. The heinous barbarism of the Hamas attack, the sense of isolation we feel when some around us celebrate that violence, and the pain of knowing how many hostages are still in Gaza have sunk us deep into our own grief and often left us with little energy remaining for other people's suffering. At the same time, for others among us, our anguish at the terrible scale of innocent Palestinian suffering or our anger at the current Israeli government has made it hard to cherish our connection with Israel. But we must reject the false binary that Israeli and Palestinian suffering are in competition with each other, or that Israeli and Palestinian freedom and security are in conflict with each other. Zionism is not a zero-sum game. As a Jew, I can feel anguish for both Israelis and also for Palestinians. We must never let ourselves believe that it is a crime to open our hearts to those who are suffering. The path to healing comes through opening our hearts even wider, not hardening them. And as a Zionist, I support Palestinians' right to self-determination too, because all peoples have that right, and also because Israel's future security and stability depend on it. Israel will never be secure as long as our neighbors are not also free. Endless war, not peace, is what makes us vulnerable. Dr. Yasmin Abu Freha, a Bedouin and Palestinian citizen of Israel, who was a physician in Beersheba, was at the hospital at October 7th when the wounded started arriving. One of her treasured colleagues had been murdered that morning. Others worked alongside her, and together they tried to save as many lives as they could, lives of Jews, Arabs, and anyone else who came into the hospital. Looking back at that year, Dr. Abu Freha describes feeling even more passionately now what she understood that day. The divide is not between Palestinians and Israelis, but between those who use violence and those who oppose violence and want to live in peace. Our Torah reading this morning commands us, "Uvacharta b'chayim," choose life. The choice is not between life for ourselves and life for others. The choice is between life and death, hachayim v'hamavet, between blessing and curse, habracha v'haklala. And it is through this choice that we might be blessed in the land of Israel. The blessing comes because of that choice. Ki hu chayecha ve'orach yamecha, לשבת על האדמה אשר נשבע אדוני לאבותיך, for thereby you shall have life, and long endure upon the land that God swore to our ancestors. Finally, when I walk past the bookshelf, the third thing I remember is the obligation to find hope. We Jews are the people of hope, and the anthem of Zionism is Hatikva, the hope of 2,000 years. We must look for hope even when the moment seems dark. The sculpture that Larry received feels to me like a postcard sent from a moment in time when peace felt like it could possibly be in reach. The reality now, of course, feels much harder. I know. There are plenty of reasons to be pessimistic. The October 7th attack showed just how cruel and ruthless Israel's enemies are and what can happen when there is a weakness in our security. And there is currently no alternative leadership to Hamas that has strength or popularity among Palestinians. Israel has the most extreme right-wing government in the nation's history, and a year after October 7th, that same government is still in power. The extremists in that government are hard at work, damaging Israel's democracy, expanding settlements in the West Bank in ways that further damage the prospects for a two-state solution, and tolerating and sometimes even inciting lawless violence by extremist settlers. I'm not done yet. Indefinite occupation has become a moral disaster, but many Israelis seem to accept it as an inescapable status quo. The Israeli population is deeply traumatized by the shock and cruel brutality of October 7th, the attacks from Hezbollah, the failure to return the hostages, and years of terrorism. The Palestinian population is deeply traumatized by the enormous devastation of the current war, not to mention years of occupation. Even if we could snap our fingers and the war would be over today, the task of rebuilding Gaza will be enormous. And even if we could snap our fingers and end the occupation in the West Bank today, it would not do anything to change the goals of Iran and its proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, who are intent on murdering Jews and destroying the Jewish state. It is religious fundamentalism, not concern for the Palestinians, that motivates these terror groups. Iran has deep pockets and the resources of a large country. Israel is so strong in so many ways, but it is a small country and can be vulnerable. I probably could go on, but I feel like I already owe you some chocolate after that list. It's too bad it's Yom Kippur. If I tried to write a list of the reasons to be optimistic, it would surely not be as long as the list of reasons to be pessimistic. I don't want to pretend that I have solutions to the enormous challenges that Israel faces right now. I don't want to pretend that I know what will happen next in this frightening war or what Israel should do. My optimism list is pretty short. But while I may not be optimistic, I will never let go of hope. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, of blessed memory, wrote that people often confuse optimism and hope. They sound similar, but in fact, they're very different. Optimism is the belief that things are going to get better. Hope is the belief that if we work hard enough, we can make things better. It needs no courage, just a certain naivete to be an optimist. It needs a great deal of courage to have hope, and hope is what transforms the human situation. The good news is that there are incredible people who are putting in the hard work necessary to make things better. And we have the opportunity to make our own hope real by supporting them. I am in constant awe of my Israeli Reform rabbinic colleagues who are on the front lines of building an Israel that lives up to our values and dreams, including by working toward peace. Take Rabbi Liora Ezrahi Vered. She leads an organization called Spirit of the Galilee, which convenes an active group of interfaith clergy, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Druze, to deepen understanding and cooperation, and to build a shared society, Jews and Arabs together, that they hope can be a model for the entire country. Or take Rabbi Dana Sharon, a congregational rabbi in Israel and a board member of Rabbis for Human Rights, who led a group of rabbis to accompany Palestinian farmers in the West Bank to their olive fields during the harvest season this year to protect them from settler violence. This year, we're not just harvesting olives, she said, we're harvesting hope. Take the Israel Religious Action Center, the Reform Movement's social action voice in Israel. When they learned that a popular rideshare company in Israel had changed its search filters in a way that enabled riders to screen out Arab cab drivers, they challenged the practice, winning 6 million shekels, over $1.5 million, in a settlement to compensate the Arab cab drivers and to support civil society organizations promoting Jewish-Arab coexistence in Jerusalem. Nidal, a Jerusalem taxi driver and plaintiff, said, "Peace starts when you struggle for justice, when you are not silent in the face of injustice, and when you fight for the things you believe in." It may feel impossible to be optimistic about peace right now, but what is within our reach is hope. Doing and supporting the hard work of peace building, the hard work of taking a small seed of possibility and building a future from it. Hope is not a feeling. Hope is a commitment to action. In our Torah reading this morning, God promises us that the mitzvot that we have been called to Jews are not impossibly hard or out of reach. Lo bashamayim hi, we read, v'lo me'ever layam hi. It's not in heaven. It's not across the sea. Ki karov elecha hadavar me'od, beficha uvilvavcha la'asoto. It is very near to you, in your mouth and in your heart, and you can surely do it. One of the handouts that you received when you came in this morning offers a few concrete ways that you can build hope for Israel in this new year. If you feel as inspired as I do by the leadership of our Israeli Reform family, who are doing so much to build the kind of Israel we all want to see, then I hope you'll consider supporting ARTSA, our Reform Movement's Israel Fund, or the IMPJ, the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism, which is the Israeli Reform Movement. Or perhaps you want to help Kibbutz Alumim as they rebuild after the destruction of October 7th. Or perhaps you want to help Rabbi Edgar Nof, a longtime friend of Beth David, with his sacred work caring for those in need, providing both financial and spiritual support to various groups, including elderly Holocaust survivors in Israel, as well as bereaved and displaced families during this war. But in addition to giving tzedakah, you can help to build hope this year by joining our global reform movement in our campaign for the upcoming World Zionist Congress election. The World Zionist Congress, sometimes called the Parliament of the Jewish People, is the elected legislative body that serves as the one platform for diaspora Jews to have a vote in the policy and budget of Israel. The World Zionist Congress meets every 5 years to make decisions that impact over $5 billion in spending. And that spending affects some of the policies and work most important to our values. Through the World Zionist Congress elections, which occur only every 5 years, we can unite in a powerful action for a democratic, equitable, and safe Israel where Reform Judaism can thrive. You can scan the QR code on that flyer to be alerted when voting opens. Or please let me know if you would be willing to help and join a team of Beth David volunteers helping to organize our congregation for this election. Friends, we stand here today on the most sacred day of the year, after a year like no other. We are called, the whole Jewish people together, to stand together and to choose life. May our love for Israel burn bright, and may our hearts open in compassion toward all those who are suffering in this conflict. And may we not grow weary or discouraged. We can build the hope we so desperately need. Gemar Tov, may all of us be inscribed for blessing in this year.